In Canada, anger continues to build concerning the government's lack of action over a self-confessed Islamic State executioner after he lied to immigration services to get back into the country. He revealed it openly on a New York Times podcast show called Caliphate. The former ISIL fighter, who goes by the name of Abu Huzaifa, left Canada 4 years ago when he was just 17 and told his parents he was flying to Turkey. But 5 months after joining the terror group in Syria, he decided that he wanted to return to Toronto, following what he originally said was his second execution, though Huzaifa has now retracted those comments, saying he has not killed anyone. Well, officials hope the man had said enough to incriminate himself on the New York Times podcast series, where he gave detailed accounts of executing people. But that may not be enough to charge him, according to documents obtained by a Canadian news network. Canada's Prime Minister has been fending off criticism about the case. And when Justin Trudeau was asked about terrorist returnees, he seemingly shifted the blame to attack Conservatives in the country instead.
When is the Prime Minister going to stop allowing these bloodthirsty terrorists to walk on our streets, but throw them in jail instead?
Mr. Speaker, once again we see the Conservatives trying to drum up fear is a way of political attack.
When will the Prime Minister finally imprison ISIS terrorists instead of allowing them to use Canada?
You're right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Once again, we saw this approach in the last election by the previous government. It doesn't work to try and scare and divide Canadians.
Well, Canadian intelligence estimates around 60 people have returned to the country after joining extremist groups in Syria and Iraq. And while many countries have tough policies to persecute those who have waged terror overseas, it seems Canada might just be allowing them back into the country.
Turns out you can't build a caliphate on the foundations of killing, rape, plunder, and more killing. They tried with bloody abandon, but no luck. So those ISIS jihadists went home to perhaps start a new life.
While they may have engaged in terrorism abroad and broken the law, not all returnees continue to pose a threat. They may now be disillusioned with the cause.
The Canadian government even has directives on how to deal with them. All right, they may have decapitated a prisoner or two or a dozen, may have repeatedly raped young girls they considered infidels, but that's all in the past. What they need now is apparently help.
The intervention team can engage with the returnee and the returnee's family to open up dialogue with the individual and to help support the returnees' disengagement from their radical ideology and past behaviour.
Before you go thinking that Canadians are crazy, no. Most people never knew how lenient their government was being with murderers and terrorists. But what really riled the public up is an interview with a former jihadist who was left free.
At first, you have to bring yourself to do it. You're like, okay, if I'm finally killing someone now. And you kind of just have to close your eyes and do it and just shoot. You're killing him for a reason. This is justified. You can do this. You're not going to be held accountable.
Now, imagine you live in the same city as this guy. Your kids walk by his house on the way to school. Yeah, that's how many Canadians feel.
This guy is apparently in Toronto. Canadians deserve more answers from this government.
Absolutely.
Why aren't they doing something about this despicable animal walking around the country?
It's amazing. People in Canada get years in jail for possession of marijuana, but a guy who may have cut off people's heads is let free because he had a change of heart. Now that people are outraged, his story's changed.
He says he doesn't deny saying them, but he's insistent that he didn't actually do those things.
No charges against him have yet been filed, if they ever will be. But you must understand what he is. Not a monster, no. ISIS fighters are no different to any other immigrants. They all bring something new to Canada. Those aren't my words. That's the Prime Minister talking.
I need to know how you're going to protect future Canadians like my young daughter and 10, 15, 20 years from now when you're letting people in with an ideology that just does not conform to what we're doing here.
One of the reasons Canada is successful as a country is because we have been open to people fleeing persecution, fleeing war zones, whether it was people fleeing the devastation of the Second World War from Southern Europe in the 50s and 60s, the Italian communities, the Greek communities, the Portuguese communities, and others.
Just belonging to a terrorist organization is enough to convict someone. It's a serious crime. So unless you cannot prove at all that the fellow was in ISIS territory and he was there to help ISIS, unless you cannot prove that at all, you have no witness, and the fellow just says, well, I made up the story, then if you can prove that he was actually there, well, you can make a case against that person and prosecute that person for terrorism and send him to jail. If the government was serious, I think that's what they would do, but I don't think they're serious about it. Pushing multiculturalism to the limit is certainly not a good thing.